My name is Sandra, and at 69, my world had shrunk to the size of my late husband's armchair. It had been 6 months since David passed, and the silence in our home was a physical presence, a constant, unwelcome guest. My only solace was the proximity of my son, Mark, and his wife, Jennifer. They lived just 10 minutes away, in a beautiful, sun-drenched house I had bought for them when their first child was born. It was a gift, a way to keep my family close, a foundation for their future. When we signed the papers, my lawyer had advised me to keep my name on the deed as the primary owner. He called it a sensible precaution for estate planning. I saw it as a mere formality, a piece of paper in a file that meant nothing compared to the trust I placed in my son. I never intended to be anything but a benevolent, distant landlady, the silent benefactor of their happiness. That house was my gift of love. I never imagined it would one day have to become my weapon of justice. David had been a man of quiet passions, a collector of stories and history. His legacy wasn't in stocks or bonds, but in the small study of the house I now shared only with his ghost. That room was a museum of his life. On the mantelpiece, in a velvet-lined case, rested his grandfather's war medals, heavy with the gravity of conflicts I could only read about. The walls were lined with shelves holding his library of first edition books, their leather spines worn like the hands of old friends. In his desk drawer lay his collection of vintage watches, each one a marvel of tiny, ticking gears, a testament to his love for craftsmanship. These were not just things, they were the physical embodiment of a life well lived. They were my connection to him, a tangible library of our shared memories. After he died, I couldn't bear to move them, but I also couldn't bear to be surrounded by them every day. So, with Mark and Jennifer's blessing, I carefully packed these treasures and moved them into the spacious, climate-controlled garage of their home, stored neatly in sealed containers. They were safe there, I thought, watched over by family until I was ready to face them again. The relationship I had with Jennifer was one of polite, practiced warmth. She was a modern woman, a minimalist, with a sleek, uncluttered aesthetic that was the polar opposite of my own comfortable, memory-filled home. I knew she found my sentimentality quaint, perhaps even suffocating. I would often see her gaze drift over the photographs and heirlooms in my living room, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher in her eyes. I mistook it for polite interest. I see now it was a quiet, simmering resentment. She had a way of making passive comments that were like tiny, sharp pebbles tossed into a calm pond. "It's amazing how much stuff people used to accumulate," she'd say while glancing at David's bookshelf. Or, "Mark and I believe in living in the now, not being weighed down by the past." Mark, my gentle, non-confrontational son, would just smile and change the subject. He existed in the buffer zone between the two of us, a perpetual peacekeeper in a war I didn't even know was being waged. He loved his wife, and he loved me, and his greatest fear was having to choose between us. Jennifer saw David's belongings in their garage not as a sacred trust, but as an invasion. It was my history, my past, cluttering up her present. It was a constant reminder that the beautiful house she lived in was not truly hers, that she was living under the long shadow of my generosity and my grief. The resentment festered, watered by her modern disdain for anything old, and fertilized by a greed I had failed to recognize. She began to see the boxes not as memories, but as junk, and junk was something you got rid of, especially if you could make a little money in the process. The call from my sister, Clara, was a welcome respite. She lived 3 hours up the coast, and her boisterous, laughter-filled home was the perfect antidote to the oppressive quiet of mine. "Come for a long weekend, Sandy," she insisted. "The ocean air will do you good." I hesitated, as I always did, reluctant to leave the bubble of my grief. But the thought of the sea, of my sister's warm embrace, eventually won me over. I called Mark to let him know I'd be away. "That's great, Mom," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "You deserve a break, don't worry about a thing here." Jennifer got on the phone, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Have a wonderful time, Sandra, we'll miss you," she chirped. "Drive safe." The night before I left, I stopped by their house to drop off a small toy for my grandson. I stood in the garage for a moment, looking at the neatly stacked containers. "Everything okay in here?" I asked Mark. "Of course, Mom," he said, giving my shoulder a squeeze. "Safe and sound." I left the next morning feeling a rare, light-hearted sense of peace, a temporary reprieve from my sorrow. I trusted them. I trusted my son. I trusted that the small corner of their home dedicated to my husband's memory was sacred ground. It never once occurred to me that the moment my car pulled out of the driveway, I was not leaving my treasures in the hands of a protector, but in the custody of a vulture. Jennifer didn't waste a single day. On Saturday morning, she dragged the sealed containers from the garage onto the driveway. With a crowbar, she pried them open, exposing David's life to the harsh morning sun. She didn't see history or love, she saw merchandise. She arranged the items on folding tables with a brutal, unsentimental efficiency. David's cherished first edition Hemingways and Faulkners were splayed open, their delicate spines cracking. His grandfather's war medals, including a Purple Heart, were tossed into a shallow box with a handwritten sign that read, "Old military stuff, $20." His collection of exquisite, intricate vintage watches was dumped unceremoniously onto a velvet cloth, their delicate mechanisms ticking away, oblivious to their humiliating fate. She posted a quick ad on a local marketplace app. Huge estate sale, antiques, books, collectibles, everything must go. She didn't use the word garage sale. She knew estate sale sounded more prestigious, a clever bit of marketing to attract the local antique dealers and resellers who swarmed such events, sniffing for treasure they could acquire for a pittance. And they came. They picked through my husband's life, haggling over his memories. Jennifer, with a cold, bright smile, sold his legacy for pocket money. A man who collected military memorabilia bought the box of medals for $15. Book dealer paid $50 for the entire library of first editions, knowing he could sell a single volume for 10 times that amount. The watches, worth thousands each, were sold off individually for $100 or $200 to a man who likely knew their true value but wasn't about to question his good fortune. By the end of the day, the tables were empty. Jennifer stood in the driveway, counting a thick wad of cash, a triumphant smile on her face. The clutter was gone. The garage was empty. She had cleansed her house of the past, and she had profited from it. I returned on Monday afternoon, my spirits lifted by the sea air and my sister's company. I felt lighter, more hopeful than I had in months. I stopped at the grocery store and picked up a few things for Mark and Jennifer, a small gesture of thanks for watching over the house. I pulled into their driveway and noticed immediately how clean, how starkly empty, the garage looked. A cold knot of dread formed in the pit of my stomach. I walked into the house, calling their names. Jennifer came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, a strained, overly bright smile on her face. "Sandra, you're back. Did you have a good trip?" "It was lovely," I said, my eyes darting past her towards the garage. "Jennifer, where are the boxes?" Her smile faltered for just a second. "Oh, we did the most amazing declutter this weekend. The garage was just so full of old junk, we decided to clear it all out. It feels so much bigger now." The words didn't compute. "Junk? What junk?" "You know," she said with a wave of her hand. "All those old books and dusty boxes. We held a big sale. You wouldn't believe what people will pay for stuff that's just collecting dust." I felt the blood drain from my face. I walked past her, my feet moving as if in a dream, and opened the door to the garage. It was cavernous, sterile, and empty. The space where my husband's memory had been carefully stored was now occupied by a new, shiny lawnmower and a bicycle rack. I turned to face her, my voice a strangled whisper. "You sold them? You sold David's things?" "Well, yes," she said, her tone defensive now. "It was just sitting there, Sandra. We needed the space. And I made over $2,000. I was going to surprise you with it." She held up the cash as if it were a peace offering, a balm for a wound she couldn't even comprehend. The medals, the books, the watches. My husband's life, his legacy, sold for $2,000. The shock was so profound, so absolute, it bypassed anger and went straight to a place of desolate, silent horror. The world tilted on its axis, and in that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. My first call was to Mark. I needed to hear his voice. I needed him to be as horrified as I was, to tell me it was all a terrible mistake he would fix. I stumbled out of their house in a daze, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful. "Hey, Mom, welcome home." "Mark," I said, my own voice sounding alien and brittle. "Jennifer sold your father's things." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a beat of damning silence. "Oh," he said finally. "Yeah, she told me she was going to clear out the garage." "She sold everything, Mark, the medals, the books, his watches. She sold his entire life for a few dollars." I was pleading with him, begging him to share my outrage, to validate my pain. His response shattered the last remnants of my hope. He sighed, a weary, put-upon sound. "Mom, try to calm down. Jennifer thought it was for the best. We really did need the space, and let's be honest, you never even looked at that stuff. It was just sitting in boxes. It's better this way. A fresh start for everyone. A fresh start. He was parroting her words, her cold, unsentimental philosophy. He was defending her. He was choosing his wife's callous convenience over his own father's memory. That was the true betrayal. Jennifer was a problem I could understand, but this, my own son's casual dismissal of our family's history, of my profound grief, was a knife to the heart. The trust I had placed in him, the very foundation of my world since David's death, crumbled into dust. I see, I said, the fight draining out of me, replaced by an icy calm. Thank you for clarifying, Mark. I ended the call before he could offer any more weak platitudes. The grief I felt in that moment was sharper and more painful than the day David had died. On that day, I lost my husband. On this day, I lost my son. That night, sleep was an impossibility. I wandered through my quiet house, every object a memory, every shadow a ghost. I looked at the wedding photograph on my nightstand, at David's smiling face, and I wept. I wept for him, for the desecration of his memory. I wept for the man my son had become, a pale shadow of the honorable man who had raised him. I wept for my own foolishness, for my blind trust and my naive belief in a familial bond that had proven to be gossamer thin. The tears, however, did not bring relief. They brought clarity. As the sun began to rise, casting long gray shadows across the floor, the grief began to recede, and in its place something else took root. It was not the hot, explosive rage I might have expected. It was a cold, hard, and utterly lucid resolve. I had given them everything, my love, my support, and a beautiful home, a sanctuary bought and paid for by the very man whose memory they had so casually discarded. They had taken my gift and spit on the sentiment behind it. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my grief for senility. They had broken the covenant between us, the unspoken agreement of family, of love, of respect, and I would not allow it to stand. They had erased my husband's past. I would now erase their future, at least the comfortable, secure future I had so lovingly provided for them. I thought of the deed to their house, sitting in my safe deposit box, with my name printed clearly as the primary owner. The legal precaution my lawyer had insisted upon, the one I had seen as a mere formality, now felt like an act of prescient genius. It was the only weapon I had left, and I would not hesitate to use it. The following morning, I called my lawyer, Arthur Vance, the same man who had handled the purchase of the house. I explained the situation to him, my voice devoid of the emotion that had racked me the night before. I was calm, precise, and methodical. I told him about the sale, about Jennifer's callousness, and about Mark's unforgivable compliance. Arthur, who had known David for 30 years, was silent for a long moment after I finished, a silence filled with a quiet, shared indignation. "Sandra, I am beyond sorry," he said, his voice laced with anger on my behalf. "This is unconscionable." "I am past sorrow, Arthur," I replied. "I need to know my options regarding the house." "Your options are straightforward," he said, his tone shifting to the professional, reassuring cadence I needed to hear. "You are the legal owner of the property. They are, in the eyes of the law, tenants living there at your discretion. You have every right to terminate that arrangement." He laid out the process, a formal written notice of eviction, delivered by a process server, giving them 30 days to vacate the premises. It was clean, legal, and absolute. There was no room for argument, no loophole for them to exploit. "Are you certain this is the path you want to take, Sandra?" he asked gently. "It's a final step." I looked at the empty space on my own mantelpiece where a photo of Mark, Jennifer, and my grandchildren used to sit. I had taken it down that morning. "They made it final, Arthur," I said. "Not me. Please draw up the papers." There was no hesitation in my voice. The part of me that was a loving, forgiving mother had died on the phone with my son. The part that was David's wife, the fierce guardian of his memory, was now in control. The eviction notice was delivered on a Friday afternoon. I wasn't there to see it, but Mark called me an hour later, his voice a frantic, panicked mess. "Mom, what is this? We got a legal notice. An eviction? This has to be a mistake." "It's not a mistake, Ma." "RK," I said calmly, my heart a cold, steady drum in my chest. "You and Jennifer have 30 days to vacate my property." "Your property?" he sputtered. "But you gave it to us. This is our home." "No," I corrected him. "I gave you the privilege of living in my home. A privilege you and your wife have proven you no longer deserve. A home is built on love and respect, Mark. You have shown me neither." The line went silent for a moment, then I heard Jennifer in the background, her voice a shrill shriek of disbelief. Mark came back on, his tone shifting from panic to a pathetic pleading. Mom, please don't do this. We're sorry. Jennifer is sorry. She just didn't understand how much that old stuff meant to you. Old stuff. Even in his apology, he used the same dismissive, trivializing language. He still didn't get it. He never would. It wasn't old stuff, Mark, I said, my voice weary. It was your father, and you let her sell him for parts. The conversation is over. I suggest you spend less time calling me and more time looking for a new place to live. I hung up the phone. The begging began in earnest the next day. They showed up at my door, Jennifer sobbing with tears that I knew were for her lost security, not for my lost husband. She apologized profusely, offering me the wad of cash she had made from the sale as if that could possibly fix anything. I refused it. Mark begged me to think of the grandchildren, a desperate, low blow that I had anticipated. I am thinking of them, I told him, my voice hard as stone. I'm thinking of how they deserve to know the legacy of the grandfather you allowed to be thrown away. I am thinking of securing their future, since you and your wife have proven so reckless with your own. I closed the door on their shocked faces. My resolve did not waver. Their apologies were not born of remorse, but of consequence. They were not sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught, and they were terrified of losing the comfortable life I had provided. The 30 days passed in a blur of silence and logistics. I hired a real estate agent and had the locks changed the day after Mark and Jennifer moved the last of their things out. They left the house in a state of disarray, a final, petty act of defiance. They moved into a cramped, two-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, their beautiful life downsized to match their character. The house sold quickly, the market being what it was. The proceeds were substantial, but the money was not for me. It was for my grandchildren, for the two innocent children caught in the crossfire of their parents' greed and their grandmother's justice. I worked with Arthur to place the entire sum into a tightly managed trust fund. The terms were ironclad. Mark and Jennifer could not touch a single penny. The money was to be used solely for the health, education, and welfare of my grandchildren, and they would not gain full control of the principal until they each turned 25. I had secured their future, protected from the carelessness of their own parents. With the legal matters settled, I turned to the more painful task, the reclamation of the past. I took the $2,000 Jennifer had tried to give me, the blood money, I called it, and began my quest. I spent weekends scouring antique shops, flea markets, and online forums. I visited the book dealers and military memorabilia collectors in the area, my heart aching with a mixture of hope and dread. Most of David's life was gone forever, scattered to the winds, but I was determined to find what I could. After weeks of searching, I found them. In a dusty corner of a military supply store, I found the velvet box containing his grandfather's medals. I paid the owner $500 for them, $500 for something that had been sold for $15. A week later, a sympathetic book dealer I'd spoken to called me. He had tracked down a few of David's first editions, including his favorite Hemingway. The watches, I learned, had been sold to a private collector online and were gone for good. But it was enough. Today, my house is quieter than ever. The estrangement from my son is a constant, low-grade ache in my heart. I see my grandchildren for a few hours every other week, a tense, supervised visit in a neutral location. Mark and Jennifer are polite, but their eyes are filled with a cold resentment. The love we once shared is gone, replaced by the bitter ashes of a broken trust. My victory was not triumphant. It was a salvage operation. I could not save my relationship with my son, but I saved everything else. I saved my grandchildren's future from their parents' irresponsibility, and I saved what little I could of my husband's legacy from their profound disrespect. This evening, I sat in David's armchair, the velvet box of his medals resting in my lap. The weight of them was both a comfort and a burden. I ran my fingers over the cool metal, the tangib. The proof of a life of honor and courage. I had paid a terrible price for this quiet moment of peace, the price of my own son. But as I sat there, in the silent, watchful company of my husband's ghost, I knew, without a doubt, that it was a price I had to pay. I had kept my promise to him. I had honored his memory. And in the end, that was the only thing that truly mattered.